absolutely adore that noise. So my motorsport past is probably not all that different from that of many children of the 70s, at least not the ones who have been die-hard motorsport fans all their lives. My dad was a racer. He pretty much spent all his spare time from his teens to when he passed away in his 50s, deep in engines or being heavily involved in the local karting scene. One of my earliest memories is of being put inside a little 4 hay bale fort by my mum at what was an embryonic Knockhill racing circuit, while my parents waved these weird coloured flags. Safety meant something very, very different back then. Another memory is around the age of 5, being bumped around in the back of a transit van with my folks, who were crewing for a rally driving friend, while we drove through a stage searching for him. We found his car, a Fiat X19 of all things, on its side down a 6-foot deep ditch. Minutes later, we found his helmet on a post, a sign in those days apparently that the driver was okay and making his way back, most likely, now I think of it, to the pub.
Right 6, brake for square left, small cut.
It was like that through my entire childhood. Vivid memories of my dad in the garage, elbows deep in the guts of his number 78 cart and covered in engine oil in preparation for another race weekend. To the point where even now, if I'm lucky enough to go to a race weekend to spectate, the smell triggers an intense craving for hot dogs with oodles of steaming hot onions. Hot dogs and engine oil was my weekend diet for many childhood years, and I loved it.
Right 5, jump over crest.
During that time, my dad was a rival to people who became quite serious names in the sport. In fact, one of my most cherished memories is of my dad walking up to this extremely cool racing driver, stood next to an extremely cool car at the now defunct Ingliston circuit outside Edinburgh. That cool racing driver beamed and said, "All right, Ian, how are you doing?" The cool racing driver was David Leslie. Dad shook his hand, and then David let me sit in his Le Mans class-winning Ecurie Cos while they reminisced about old times. My dad had been blisteringly fast, you see, but also just a little too willing to risk his own life to win. By the end of his career, he'd broken his legs and ankles too many times to carry on, and he'd had his right ankle completely reconstructed and held together with something like 18 pins. He showed me the x-ray, and it had what looked like a spanner in there, connecting his shin to his ankle. I still remember his howls of anguish in hospital as they cleaned his wounds, not because of the wire wool, and yeah, it was wire wool, but because they had to cut him out of his extremely expensive leathers. They made drivers differently back then, arguably tougher, but sorry Dad if you're still watching me somewhere, maybe just a mite dafter. He spent a half hour every morning just sat on the edge of his bed persuading his ankle to loosen up, pretty much for the rest of his life. Motorsport, it turns out, really is dangerous. He was lucky in a great many ways to get away with just that. Which brings me to my own racing career, which lasted 6 months max. I was maybe 4 years old. My dad had me on his knees at the steering wheel while he did the pedals, and he didn't hold back either. And it turned out I was quite good too. So we did that every week while he tested the kart. And then my mum watched one day. And I don't know, maybe due to nerves, I got it wrong. I ended up on the grass and I spun. Now I wasn't hurt, but my mum, possibly knowing how daft my dad was, understandably put a stop to it. From then on, it was the life of a spectator. It wasn't all bad. I was kept occupied most race days with a stopwatch and a notepad, which might go some way to explaining why I love hot lapping and time trialling in any game that allows it now, from Wipeout to R Factor 2, forever trying to shave a tenth off my times. And those hot dogs were awesome too. And it sparked an interest in photography, which has infused my entire life and been my career for decades now. I've raced less than a handful of times for real since, and they were very much special occasions. And of course, I was an 18-year-old idiot boy with a car once too, so I hooned around my beloved Highlands at great speed, thankfully without endangering anyone. Eventually, I got some sense in my brain and I slowed down, basically when my daughter arrived on the scene. I say all this because it goes some way to painting a picture of the mindset of my particular subset of sim racers. Those of us for whom the cost and the danger eventually accounted us out. But also for whom motorsport has been a central pivot of our lives. And I tell you this for one singular purpose, so that when I say that motorsport is something of a comfort blanket for me, a grown-up 49-year-old cynical bloke, you know that I mean it, and you know why. It's been my go-to escape. Curl up on the sofa and watch the racing whenever I can. The roar and buzz of any kind of engine drowning out all the worry and anxiety that being a grown-up brings with it. Which brings me to the now. With the current crisis affecting us all, motorsport is clearly not there. That comfort blanket has been taken away and sold at the charity shop alongside all my other toys, like that original James Bond Aston Martin my mum decided to donate to my frickin' cousin when I was 10. Not that I'm bitter. Thankfully, sim racing stepped up to the plate. Within days of the cancelled Aussie GP, we had Max Verstappen and Lando Norris stepping in to save the day, and others followed suit. And since then, we've had a wondrous smorgasbord of modern-day and veteran racing legends. Hell, The Race, a YouTube channel and motorsport website, has been putting on some stellar events which had names I've never dreamed of being on the same track. Dario Franchitti, Jenson Button, a 73-year-old Emerson Fittipaldi, for goodness sake, all in the same race, all using those real-world racing skills and instincts, except this time it's relatively attainable for many of us. I don't need a massive budget just to run a kart, which sadly is no longer the grassroots sport it was in my dad and David Leslie's day. I already have a reasonable PC for my work. I have a Logitech G29 wheel which can be had for about £150, and I could buy some racing games. It's still not objectively inexpensive, but it's within reach of many gamers, something that actual motorsport is not. Hell, Jacques Villeneuve put the cat among the pigeons this weekend by taking on other legends of the real-life sport, armed only with a laptop and an Xbox pad. Heretical as it sounds, the Formula One world champion just proved you can sim race without a wheel. I'm almost frightened to look at the reaction on the purist forums. But anyway, after that first wonderful sim race in place of real-life F1 when the Australian GP was cancelled, I might have panic bought a sim racing seat. And it's actually very good. It has some super clever design in it, and it has transformed my experience. Crucially for its acceptance in a house also occupied by my family, it folds away pretty easily. Now, I may do a piece on it later on. From that point on, social distancing has been more bearable. I've been playing WRC8 for months now, but with the wheel set up and crucially for me everything at the right angle, which is what this chair does, it all feels so much more natural and immersive, and I'm able to do things I just couldn't do with the pad, Jacques Villeneuve aside. It did take a decent amount of time to acclimatise to the wheel, though I was definitely slower than I was with the pad for a few days after I switched. And then I got R-Factor 2. Now, R-Factor 2 is incredibly difficult to install, and after a very painful week of tearing my hair out getting it to work, I even refunded it once and then watched another race and was desperate to get it to work, so I got it back again. Look at the C++ redistributables. If you're having trouble, that should be your first port of call. The first thing I did after that was find a version of my beloved Knock Hill to download, and the fabulous NGTC British Touring Cars mod. With all that installed, I drove round in circles, smiling like a loon for about 7 hours while I got really acclimatised to driving a car in circles while sitting still. The simulation is so good that I actually think if you have any real-world experience of driving, then despite its hardcore rep, it's actually pretty easy to drop into, because it does what you expect, especially with a touring car mod, in my opinion. Needless to say, it was wonderful. I had my comfort blanket back, and it has now become one of my major social distancing projects. A way to keep cabin fever at bay and to feel like I'm going places. If you have the means, I really recommend it as a way to beat the lockdown blues. R-Factor 2 is a world unto itself with the sheer amount of content to access, both free and paid, Now, I just bought a GT3 pack in the Nürburgring track, and it seemed expensive at first, but laser scanned Nordschleife is a marvel, and I can see me spending a very long time indeed just learning it in a Porsche GT3. I've bought into the early access of Automobilista 2, and I can see huge amounts of potential there as well. I know there are tribes of players out there ready to rip it apart because of its Project Cars 2 core, but I can safely say it's becoming less like PC2 and more fun to drive with every passing update. I won't be playing it super regularly until it's completed, but I will be popping in to sample the updates when they appear. With the right cars right now, and for me that's the Ultima GTR, then the handling is just great. And the racing is fine as long as you wait to get past the first corner before going into full race mode. There's a known issue with the AI currently which should be fixed soon. Next steps? Well, I've been looking at the whole field of view issue, but I have some problems with the field of view argument. Not the sense of speed problem, which a lot of people quote, but more that it just doesn't feel safe to drive while looking through a letterbox. I am of the opinion that you need a little bit more spatial awareness, and if you don't have the funds, and this is where things get into the unattainable realms, if you don't have the funds for 3 screens just to play a racing game, then the field of view argument is a little bit moot. I'll give it a bit more time, but honestly, I think the best way is to sidestep it entirely and go VR. And now I'm lucky enough to have a Rift S, so that shouldn't be an issue, although I do realise that is also a massive expense. My first step on the way to VR though is setting up a free app called Crew Chief so that I can drop keyboard use as much as possible. It looks absolutely remarkable and I'll likely do a piece on that soon. I'm also going to be devouring a lot of Skip Barber training videos which seem to be on YouTube if you know where to look. And I think that's pretty much it. My first month of sim racing. The plan is to do another one a month from now, but we do more than just sim race in the gaming space, and first and foremost is our podcast with me and Dan, and you can find it by searching for the Clod of War podcast in most of the big podcasting services, definitely on Spotify, which I'll link below. So until next month, stay safe ladies and gents, stay sane, and let me know if you plan on joining me in this sim racing adventure. Oh, and if you liked it, do give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, why are you still here? But give me a thumbs down, I guess. All our love from the Clods of War.